So Scott Ritter went on Sabby Sab's YouTube channel and Sabby was asking Scott to comment on Iran and them potentially developing nuclear weapons, and he thought if they did or went down that route, it would be a threat to, quote, peace and stability in the world, which I think he is frankly completely wrong in that analysis. And I think it would be more accurate to say that if Iran doesn't try to develop nuclear weapons, it would be a threat to peace and stability in the world. And I agree with Max Blumenthal. He said on the Gray Zone live stream earlier today that his analysis is that the only way for Iran to get out of the situation that they're in, i.e. this escalation, this continued escalation and threats of war by the US towards Iran, is to develop a nuclear weapon, which would be a deterrent. And Blumenthal cited some historical examples of this. So North Korea, the DPRK I should say, has a nuclear weapons program, and it has been a deterrent from the US escalating into an all-out war against that country because they have nuclear weapons that they could use as a deterrent. And then there's obviously the example of Libya, who I believe, and Blumenthal mentioned this, that Libya was going down that path to nuclear armament, but then they disarmed. Look what happened to that country. They were this US NATO-backed invasion that toppled the Libyan government. Libya had the highest standards of living on the continent of Africa prior to that. They did very well by their people there in a lot of ways, very high level of development and infrastructure. They wanted to chart their own path. Look what happened to them. And they still don't have a stable, functioning government. And this is what going on 14 years after the fact. So those are two, I think, very important examples to look at. What happens to a country when they, get rid of their plans to pursue nuclear armament as a deterrent against, imperial aggression vis-a-vis the US and their little settler colony apartheid brother Israel, because obviously Israel has wanted to start a US-led war against Iran since going back towards the Iraq War era, and Zionist interests still very much support that. So I think Blumenthal's analysis is much more on point than Ritter's, I think. And obviously, as Blumenthal pointed out too, why would anybody in Iran, let alone in leadership roles there, trust any type of agreement that the United States, that the Trump admin might make with the country? Iran was following literally to a T the JCPOA, or the Iran nuclear deal, until the first Trump administration ripped it up to shreds, even though, again, Iran was in 100% compliance with that. There's never going to be any assurances that any type of agreement that the US government signs, agrees to with Iran, that the next month, the next year, the next administration isn't going to go back on that and do a complete 180. So I think it's a threat to Iran's peace and stability in the region if Iran was to not try to pursue some type of nuclear weapon, because they could use it as the ultimate deterrent. there was a video that Iranian officials, I think, released maybe last week or earlier this week, showing a new weapons system that they just designed. Is like, hey, US military, you start fucking with us, you start dropping bombs, we have this. There's a lot of US military bases in the region that they could, use these various weapons systems, to project those weapon systems to if the US was to attack. I don't know. So they obviously have some very, very heavy decisions to make, and we'll see what happens. But whose perspective do you think is more valid? Ritter's, who said it's a threat to peace and stability if Iran was to develop nuclear weapons, or mine and Blumenthals, who thinks it's might be the only option that Iran has to avoid a all-out full-scale war. But even you also have a kind of third perspective from people like Professor Mohammed Morandi, who gives a lot of great interviews on different channels like Danny Haifong's, and he's been on the Gray Zone before, who says that Iran has more than enough deterrent power at this point to really honestly crash the global economy if the US was ignorant enough to start bombing Iran, because of the amount of oil that is shipped in the region, as well as the amount of US military bases and the Gulf monarchies that are in the region. So that's also a third perspective too, which, Iran obviously knows their capabilities than anybody from the outside does. So maybe as a Westerner, I'm, underestimating their capabilities. So lots to consider, but definitely some very volatile, heavy times. Peace, much love.